you know how your friend gets like a white colored car or whatever, and you're like, yo, this is so dope. And then all of a sudden you start to see all of the white colored cars that are in town. It's kind of the same concept. It's like you never know something is there until you look for it. All right, welcome back to the Resolution Podcast, where we help hip hop artists gain clarity on their calling. I'm your host, Alex Lacey. It's our 13th episode. Is that right? 13th? 14th, excuse me. Last episode it was Zachary Walmark. He was, if you haven't checked that out, that was an awesome conversation. We talked about how bass got introduced to hip hop from Jamaica and how it even got to Jamaica from there. So I'll leave a link up here, I think, maybe other side. Anyway, if you're watching on YouTube, it'll be on one of the top corners. So this week I'm planning on it being a little bit of a shorter one. I want to get into some more practical things in terms of how you can elevate yourself as an artist and elevate your fan base. And that really boils down to branding. And I'm sure you've heard a lot about that. I'll leave a link to Adam Ivy's YouTube channel if you haven't heard of him. He just basically, that's all he talks about is just marketing, branding. It's incredible. I bought one of his courses. It was hell expensive, but it was worth it. I mean, I got a shift in mindset, which one thing that I've come to realize recently was if you're going to invest in anything, invest in a shift in mindset. So that's like books, courses, seminars, networking, meeting people, investing in those conversations that are just life changing and you never will ever forget. Those are the ones you want to be a part of, and because those are the ones that are going to shape you. Anyway, I'm getting off track. This week I want to talk about branding and how if I was to break down my brand and build it back up again, this is how I would go about it. And I don't really see many people talking about it. So I would go and I would find what I call buzzwords or keywords. You know how you go into Google and you type in a couple keywords like Griselda type beat, Griselda type beat. Those are like three keywords, or Griselda and beat, I guess more specifically, would be the keywords that you would type in for certain search results to come up. And you'd see those and go, okay, these are helpful for what I want to do with them. So I call them keywords because I believe that our minds work a similar way. I believe that what we want to see is what we will see, or seek as you will find, as some people put it. I believe that when you're super passionate about something and you overhear, say you're at a party or something, you overhear somebody having a conversation about that one topic, your ears are going to perk up and just like it's going to catch it like a radar. It's kind of the same thing as like, you know how your friend gets like a white colored car or whatever, and you're like, yo, this is so dope. And then all of a sudden you start to see all of the white colored cars that are in town. It's kind of the same concept. It's like you never know something is there until you look for it. So that's what these buzzwords are based on. So all of your buzzwords are all of the things that you care deeply about. So for me, I actually wrote a list just before I started recording the podcast. I wrote down a lot. Holy crap. I wrote down wisdom, boom bap, swimming, graffiti, sample, jazz, dance, mixing, networking, masculinity, production, hip hop, marketing, MC slash rapper, God, copywriting, and branding, fittingly. I want to break a couple of those down that might not make sense. Swimming, I actually swim for like, how many years was that? From 5th grade to senior year. So that was 7 years, something like that. Senior year of high school. I'm a senior in college right now. So whenever I hear somebody talking about swimming, I was like, oh, yo, that's something I can relate to. Also, I was raised in Colorado, and we just had a class today, and we had a guest speaker, and she was also from Colorado, and I was like, hell yeah! Like my ears perked up when I heard that. So that's something that I could identify with. I see that as something as part of my identity, if you will. Graffiti, I've always thought that was dope. Just even growing up, I was like, damn, I'd love to do that one day. Wisdom, I mean, I want to help hip hop artists speak their truth, which I want to break down a couple of these and see how I'm implementing them into my brand specifically. And I'm not taking all of my keywords and putting them into my brand. For example, I'm not really putting swimming into my brand. I mean, maybe I might touch on something on that in the future, just to like, they call it content or pattern interrupts. Adam Ivy calls them that. And it's just basically where you have, you're posting something very similar, and then you have a pattern interrupt, and that gets people going, oh, whoa, like that caught my attention. That was new and different, because we're always looking for novelty. That's why it's called the news, and so many people watch the news. So we're always looking for novelty. So you never know. Swimming might be a part of that. Masculinity, I might touch on that just because I care so much about it. Like I'm very sensitive to that. I don't really want to get into that too much just because that's not necessarily part of my brand. It might be in the future, but just who I am as a man in this day and age and how that affects the people around me, because there's so much talk about toxic masculinity and violence at home propagated by men, which now is coming out. That's not so much the case as much anymore. And there are a lot of factors for why that is. But for me, as a man who's trying to go against the grain in terms of that aspect, it's something I care deeply about. And men's mental health, and the idea of like men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide. So I mean, I hope I don't get demonetized for this, but oh well. I'm not even at the point where I could get monetized, so it's fine. So, I mean, that's something I care deeply about, and I wasn't even trying to go off on why. It just kind of happened. So that's why it just slipped out. That's why it's a keyword. And then hip hop, I love it. That's something my brand is geared around. Marketing, I'm trying to market myself, so MC, rapper, those are the people I'm trying to help. I'm trying to help hip hop artists speak their truth, which kind of ties back into the wisdom thing. When people hear truth and wisdom, that's kind of synonymous in terms of we see wisdom as truth, which truth is an interesting concept to me as of recent, because it seems like what's really true, if we're just subjective creatures and we are just seeing life through our own filters, then we would only have subjective truths, right? That we all agree on. It's not necessarily objectively true because we're all subjective. So I don't know how that works. And then God, I believe in God, so my ears are gonna pick up that when somebody's talking about it. And copywriting, and then brand. Copywriting is actually part of advertising, which is what I'm majoring in college. So if somebody's talking about how to write a better hook, which is the way to get people like hooked in, I actually have a podcast on that as well, talking to a former professor of mine named Charlie Dietz. I'll link that somewhere as well. We go in and we talk about how hooks are so important in any kind of writing. He's a journalism professor, so it's very apparent for him because journalists want people to read their stories. So you want to have a compelling hook so people will get hooked on it, or people will click on it, and they'll read it. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, is finding your buzzwords or your keywords. I'm just going to call them keywords because that's what I've been calling them. Just finding your keywords and knowing the more that you find and the more that you're aware of, the more you can pair them together and the more you can cultivate something that is incredibly unique and unique to you, so you can have your own personal voice and be the only person talking about it. It's like who was it? I think it was Jamie Foxx. I saw an interview with him, or like a little Instagram clip of him in an interview who's talking about don't be, oh no, it was Terry Crews, excuse me. He said, don't try to be the best, try to be the only, which like blew my mind. It was like, hell yeah, I'm going to do exactly that. Just be the only, I'm going to be the only producer trying to help hip hop artists speak their truth. And that's it. Because I don't see anybody else doing it, so I'm the only person doing it, so I'm the best. By default, there you go. So it takes away all the competition. I mean, competition can be good. I mean, it's hip hop. We got a history of competition, so. But it's all good. So just knowing your keywords and knowing how you can brand yourself in terms of that, because then you'll be branding yourself in an authentic way, which is incredibly powerful, as we are all independent artists, really, just trying to make our way and make our own way and just market ourselves. And it gets tough, and it gets a lot easier if we have a brand, because then we have something to shoot for. We have a mission. We have something to focus on. We have like a North Star. And it just helps. It helps with all of the decisions going forward. And it kind of ties into the idea of Start With Why by Simon Sinek. That's a book I've been meaning to read. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It talks all about, starting with why, starting with your core values and who you are, and making decisions based out of that, which mine is helping hip hop artists speak their truth. Come back right back to that. So, I mean, like I said, that's all it comes down to. And that's why this podcast exists. It's helping hip hop artists gain clarity on their calling. It's kind of in the same vein. But I want to get to the next part, which is what I believe the purpose of all artists are. And I want to break it down, and I want to prove it to you with a couple of examples. I believe that your sole purpose as an artist is to tell your audience's story to them. There's a book that I read, I've mentioned this before, it's called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, and it's all about negotiating, which is interesting. And one of the ways that he says is one of the best ways to get people to feel like they've been understood is to repeat back to them what they just said to you, but in your own words. And it's crazy too, because I learned that lesson in college, but it wasn't in a class either. I was in the library doing my homework or whatever, and I was listening to this student getting help from a tutor, and she said, okay, I think I understand it, but I'm going to explain it back to you, and you tell me if I get any of it wrong. And that blew my mind. I was like, holy crap, because now they know exactly what I do and don't understand. So it helps, not only does it help clear up the message that was given to that student, it helps the tutor understand where the student is and what they do and don't understand. And it helps the tutor know that they've been heard. And that was like, it blew me away. So anyway, what you are doing as an artist, as an MC, is you're just telling your audience their story. And here are a couple examples of that. Element by Kendrick Lamar. There's a line that goes, my daddy commissary made it to commas. That line is, if you want to look at it literally, it's false, because Kendrick's dad never went to jail, according to Dissect the podcast, which incredible podcast, by the way, breaks down that whole album in incredible detail. Highly recommend it. So saying my daddy commissary made it to commas, basically telling his audience something that they can relate to, because a lot of his artists, a lot of their fathers are in jail, which is very unfortunate, and it's just, first of all, so wrong on so many levels, but it's something that they can relate to. And that's why he is so provocative, or not so provocative, so effective, excuse me, because he knows his audience so well that he's able to tell their stories back to them. And the same thing with J. Cole's For Your Eyes Only. It, instead of one line, it is an entire album telling his audience their story. And that story is a man that kind of grows up. He's like way into the parties, as seen in Deja Vu, and then he gets married, and in the song She's Mine Part 1, and then has a daughter, and She's Mine Part 2. And at the end, it was only then that we realized that it was a whole concept album in the outro For Your Eyes Only. And I mean, that blew me away, because I mean, it's just an incredible album, because it's one of the albums, this is kind of a side note, but that was one of the first albums that I really picked up the narrative on, which, first of all, albums are hella expensive. Like, what was it, for an independent artist? I think I saw it was, the tab was like $30,000, and that includes like studio time, photo shoots, album covers, rollouts, touring. Touring's a big one. I didn't realize how expensive touring was, but that's a huge expense. So all of that, like $30,000, I was like, damn, that artist must have something to say if they spent that much money on a body of work. It has to be something significant to them, at least. So that's why I started listening to albums in like much better detail in terms of the narrative and the overall story. That's why For Your Eyes Only by J. Cole, that's why I love that album so much. And the third, I kind of got off track, but the third example that I have is Nas, I Gave You Power, which is a little bit of a weird example because he is using the metaphor of a gun for the premise of that song, which is still helping that idea of telling his audience their story, because a gun is such a common item in their environment. So why not tell a story from the perspective about a common item in their environment? For example, nowadays what would be really cool is if you wrote a song about a phone, or like from the perspective of a phone, like having the user just like swiping through them, and just doing whatever. You could, I mean, like I said, you tailor that story to the people in your audience and what they can relate to, and then they will just relate to it and think it's the coolest thing ever. So that's my advice for starting your brand, and what I believe the purpose for all artists should be is just to help their audience feel heard. And just doing that by listening, which I talked about in, 2 episodes ago. That was episode 11. No, that was episode 12. I'm getting my numbers mixed up. So that's all it really comes down to, is just letting other people feel heard. That's what I believe all artists and their purpose is. And my purpose as a producer is to help artists help other people feel heard. So I'm just trying to help you help them, just try to make this world a better place before we go, So anyway, I'm starting to ramble on. So before I continue, I hope you all have a great night wherever you are, and I will see you next week. Until then, hit up the Instagram. I'm starting to post a lot more on there. I'm really trying to get the rest of these podcast videos kind of edited down, something I can post. And so, yeah, it's a grind, but it's a good one. So anyway, I'll see y'all next week. Peace.